Okay, so theoretically, after the last podcast on the origin of life, we sort of have got life here, at least hypothetically. We've found a way to do that. All right, now, hang on, get my little pen. All right, now we're going to kind of go through some key events in life's origin and progression. So, first, if you're going to have life on Earth, you got to have Earth. Earth formed, let's remember, about 4.6 billion years ago, depending on what textbook you read, but 4.6 billion years ago is when we usually say Earth formed. Not life, just Earth. And it took a while for life to get here, okay? First life, okay, evidence for that. Life is thought to have originated around 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, again, depending on whom you read. Prokaryotes would have been the first life forms on Earth. Please know what a prokaryote is. The simplest type of cells, they lack a nucleus. Simple, and obviously, since they are the first life to have formed, a very ancient life form, but neither of these terms means bad or unsuccessful. Prokaryotes are extraordinarily successful. Bacteria, which is what all prokaryotes are, bacteria are everywhere. An extremely successful life form. Okay? There's a picture here of a 3.5 billion year old fossilized bacterium. There's some modern bacteria, photosynthetic bacteria in that picture. So let me go back one slide real quick. So we are talking origin of Earth way back here on this little scale, and we go up here, and it's not until about here, according to this scale, that we see first life. And this is all prokaryotic life here. And you notice that this yellow bar indicating prokaryotes goes right up to the present day. So there have been prokaryotes on Earth since the beginning, and they're still here, and they're still very successful. Okay? Now, okay? Indeed, some of the most ancient fossils we have of bacteria are called stromatolites. These scientists over here in this picture are standing in some what looks like marsh, and may well be, but these are thick bacterial mats that they are standing on. And stromatolites are fossils of these bacterial mats that look very much like our modern bacterial colonies, like you see in the photograph. Whoops, my bad. I went one too far. This is pictures of stromatolites that are fossil bacteria, and some of the most ancient bacteria have been taken from these fossilized bacterial mats, and you can see some there, okay, and there. Currently the oldest known fossils of living things are in these stromatolites, okay? And they are bacteria. Now, the next really important event, not that there probably weren't others, but for us, is that finally we got oxygen in the atmosphere. The bacteria, all up until this point, survived with no oxygen. They were anoxic, anaerobic bacteria. Well, oxygen began to be produced in the atmosphere. And unless you could not only use the oxygen, but survive, remember, oxygen wants to break things down. Organisms had to learn to survive in those, or evolve to survive in those conditions. So, we had a really big shift in the kinds of life on Earth once oxygen began to accumulate. Oxygen began to build up in our atmosphere around 2.7 billion years ago. How do we know that? How do we know? Nobody was there to write it down. Well, it's pretty easy. There's lots of evidence in the rocks. The Earth went from a reducing to an oxidizing atmosphere like what we would expect if we go outside today. And the evidence we have is in the rocks. We can see in this picture, this orange, it's rust. There's iron in the rocks and it's rusting. And rocks that are older than 2.7 billion years, you don't see rust. Why? Because there was no oxygen to rust the iron. After 2.7 billion years, you see rust in the rocks. Okay? So that's really important. It made aerobic cellular respiration possible, which is what we and most other living things use as a means to get energy. Now, where did this oxygen come from? Did it just poof here from nowhere? No. Bacteria put it here. What kind of bacteria? Bacteria that could do photosynthesis, because if you will recall, photosynthesis is glucose, whoops, sorry, I was just getting ready to, my bad, is sunlight plus CO2 plus H2O is going to give us glucose and oxygen. So that's photosynthesis, and this oxygen became very plentiful in the atmosphere, and organisms that adapted to use it did well. Those that could not are reduced to really marginalized existence today, or they in fact went extinct, which many of them did. The photosynthetic bacteria that put oxygen into the atmosphere, one example of them is called cyanobacteria. If you know your art, cyano is blue-green. These bacteria were blue-green because of the chlorophyll that they contained. So please know that plants aren't the only things that do photosynthesis. Bacteria, some bacteria can do photosynthesis as well. All right, and it's really important for us that they could. All right, now the next big event in the history of life on Earth is to get not just prokaryotic life, but now get some complex cellular forms, some eukaryotes. The first eukaryotes get the development of these more complex internal membranes. Please remember that we think of a membrane as being the outside of the cell, but if it were not for membranes, there wouldn't be any organelles, or very few organelles either. So what we are looking at here is probably a bacterial-like cell. It's got the DNA just floating in the cytoplasm. It may have a cell wall. Bacteria do have a cell wall, but the cell membrane is here, and there are little foldings of the cell membrane that fold in on itself a little bit to give extra surface area for activities that might occur on the cell membrane. But again, there's no nucleus. Then we see this progression for these little foldings in, this increasing of surface area so that little enzymes on the membranes can do their jobs more efficiently. We see that encroaching onto the interior of the cell. And then what we see is perhaps a nucleus concentrated around that genetic material forming. It's a hypothesis about how we could have arrived at a nucleus. Okay? Prokaryotic cell, infoldings of those plasma membranes. Then we get this prokaryote that is going to be the ancestor of the eukaryotes, and we see the first endoplasmic reticulum, the first nucleus, and so on in our earliest eukaryotic cells. Okay? The thing that eukaryotes do is these little compartmentalizations create internal microenvironments, meaning compartments where different processes can occur. Processes that might not be very compatible if they were all happening in the same place. And the big advantage is specialization and increased efficiency. You can have multiple processes going on at the same time in the cell. They won't fight with each other because you can compartmentalize them in little organelle compartments, and the cell can be very, very efficient and thus outcompete from time to time its prokaryotic competitors. Okay, and natural selection would have favored this. All right, now endosymbiosis is the idea that some of these organelles, like mitochondria and chloroplasts, were not just begun as little invaginations, little infoldings of the cell membrane like that. They were, in fact, at one time, free living organisms, prokaryotes, that became involved in a mutualistic symbiotic relationship with some eukaryotic ancestor. Okay? So you have an ancestral eukaryotic cell that's got a nucleus, you've got some ER, maybe a Golgi body, and it, in search of food or whatever, engulfs a little prokaryote right there. Okay? Now, this prokaryote is aerobic. It's able to do cell respiration, but instead of consuming this mitochondria, eating it, the eukaryotic organism just engulfs it and does not digest it. Okay? Now, that little bacterium then gets incorporated as part of a mutualistic relationship. And now, what's the advantage? Well, the advantage for this eukaryote is now we've got this little dude in here making energy. He's doing cellular respiration and making lots of energy that can help out this eukaryote. What's the advantage for this guy? Well, he's got a nice protected place to live. And it is thought that this is how mitochondria came to be. And there's lots and lots of evidence to support it. Not the least of which is that mitochondria have their own DNA molecules that look very much like bacterial DNA molecules. They also can undergo division. They can reproduce themselves inside of cells. They can't reproduce outside of cells anymore, but as long as they're inside cells, mitochondria can make more mitochondria. So that is one idea about endosymbiosis. It is also thought that chloroplasts evolved very similarly, that chloroplasts were once free-living photosynthetic bacteria that got engulfed by a larger eukaryote, and that a eukaryote that already had mitochondria in it, because remember, plants have both chloroplasts and mitochondria. And so, if we follow the slide here, the origin of chloroplasts, you've got this eukaryotic cell that already had mitochondria in it, and it engulfed a photosynthetic bacterial, but again did not digest it. And lo and behold, you again enter into a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. Again, what did the photosynthetic bacteria have to offer this larger cell? The making of food. What did the larger cell have to offer the little chloroplast? It offered it, actually my arrows are going the wrong way, sorry. It offered it protection and a nice place to live, okay? So, natural selection would have favored that. And again, there's all kinds of evidence. Oh, one more piece of evidence for both of these is that they have both organelles have a double membrane around them. And that is thought to have originated because you originally would have had this single membrane around this guy, but as he got engulfed, he gets packed in with this little bubble created by this guy, and so you end up with a double membrane layer. And they both are double membrane structures. They both have their own DNA, and they both can reproduce within the cell and make baby chloroplasts and baby mitochondria. Okay, so endosymbiosis is pretty important. Here's a nice list of the evidence. Mitochondria and chloroplasts both resemble bacteria in the way they are built. They both have their own circular DNA molecules like bacteria do that look different from eukaryotic DNA, which is in lines. And mitochondria and chloroplasts move around in the cell, and they reproduce independently from the cell. And Lynn Margulis is the lady that thought this up, and it is pretty well documented. Okay? More important events in the history of life on Earth. the big animal explosion, which occurred at the Cambrian period. You don't need to know the name of that, but about 543. And please look, we are now dealing in millions of years, not billions. So this is, in terms of life on Earth, pretty darn recent. In fact, remember, we're starting back here with the origin of prokaryotes back here, origin of the Earth here, first life here. Now we've got eukaryotes originating here. And it's not until we get here that we get a significant amount of animals, okay? So, took a long time to get animals revved up and ready to go. All right. And the Cambrian explosion resulted in some crazy animals, all of them in the ocean. First life was, as the fossil record reveals, all aquatic based, and some crazy life forms, some body plans that just didn't make it and went extinct, but some that we still have around today as well. We don't need to go into this slide for our purposes. Do be aware that mass extinctions are part of the history of life on Earth. There was a mass extinction when the oxygen came into the atmosphere that blew out a bunch of the bacteria that were alive. There, of course, was the dinosaur mass extinction. There are mass extinctions that are part of life. We've talked about punctuated equilibrium, which is the idea that as the environment on the Earth changes, equilibrium, which is an evolutionary concept, that we may have a big extinction, which then frees up lots of niches and lots of habitat for the organisms left behind to radiate out and evolve to fill those niches. And this kind of plays off of that idea. Okay. The Cambrian explosion of life was such an event where you had this animal explosion after some extinction of other things and so on. There's your Cretaceous extinction of the dinosaurs, thought to be caused by a big meteor strike in the Yucatan Peninsula, off of Mexico. Early mammal evolution, once we got rid of the dinosaurs, the mammals were free to kind of come in and take charge and fill in all those niches that the dinosaurs left open. I'm not going to go a whole lot into that. Now, I do want to refresh your memory about the kingdoms of life on Earth. When I first started teaching, it was 5 kingdoms. All the bacteria were lumped into one kingdom. That's not true anymore. There are 2 kingdoms that hold bacteria. So please understand that these bacteria all look the same to us, but in reality, they are at least as different as we are from a fungus. They can't even be in the same kingdom together. And then we have all the eukaryotic kingdoms, the fungi, the plants, the animals, and the protists. The protists is a very badly organized kingdom, and they're trying to sort that out, but right now it's just very, very poorly organized. It's the junk drawer. If scientists saw an organism and they couldn't place it into one of these other kingdoms, they'd chuck it into Protista. They are eukaryotic, and that's about all they have in common. Algae, amoeba, things like that are all in that one kingdom. Now, these archaebacteria are also called extremophiles because they are found in mostly very extreme types of conditions, geysers, hot vents, hot springs rather, very salty conditions, things like that. And it's thought that actually the eukaryotes are probably the closer relatives of these archaebacteria than they are of the regular bacteria that we have around with us mostly today. Okay? Now, this slide is going to kind of highlight for you the classification schemes. This is the old one, where all the bacteria were in one, and then all the eukaryotic kingdoms are over here. That has since been busted up so that these guys are in 2 separate kingdoms. And in fact, we have now what is called a 3-domain system, where we have a bacteria domain, which is above the kingdom an archaebacteria domain and a eukaryote domain that is above all of the kingdoms of eukaryotes. They are currently splitting up all these into many bacterial kingdoms, many archaebacteria kingdoms, many protist kingdoms. Remember, that's the junk drawer, and so they're really trying to sort that out. And then, of course, our regular plant, fungus, and animal kingdom. So there's a lot of work in taxonomy as we can increasingly figure out who is related to whom, okay? Monera didn't work. There were too many different bacteria in it, and protists are still too diverse, okay? The idea is we don't want a bunch of organisms that aren't really that closely related to each other within the same kingdom. So we want to get them sorted so that they're in closer relationships. Domains are basically kind of super kingdoms. It's a level on top of the kingdom. You should be aware of it. And again, bacteria, archaea, which are those extremophiles that we are probably more closely related to than we are to these guys. And these are guys that hang out in methane vents and salty places. Halogen is salty. Thermophiles, they live in really hot places, kind of crazy stuff. And then, of course, all the eukaryotes are under one domain. The protists, the fungi, the plants, the animals, and we are still trying to sort out that one. Okay? Now, what about these three domains? Why is it, first of all, that the eukaryotes are thought to be more closely related to these guys than they are to these guys? Well, if you look at some really boring characteristics, you can kind of see that we tend to share a little bit more in common with these guys than we do with those. For example, why I'm going on with this, you don't need this, but understand that more links exist between these two. Okay, and here you can see that the archaeans and the eukaryotes share a more recent common ancestor than the eukaryotes do with the bacteria, who don't share a common ancestor to back here until back there. Okay, so and that's just another diagram of basically what you've seen already. Okay, so I think that does it. I hope you are still conscious. If you're not, I totally get that. And I do want you to look at this. Does anybody know what that is? That is the rover that is right now on Mars, and it is looking for evidence of organic compounds and or life, and it has got chemical tests it can do, and they hope to find out if there was ever any organic compounds, much less any life, on Mars by using the capabilities of this rover. So keep an eye on what's going on with the rover. We might find out if life ever existed anywhere else except for on Earth. Okay, so thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time. Take it easy.